to the Weekly Bioanalysis, a KCAS podcast.
Hello and welcome to the 32nd episode of the Weekly Bioanalysis and the final one of 2020. My name is John Perkins and I am the Senior Scientific Advisor for all things related to LC-MS technologies. I've been with KCAS for a little over a year, but I've been in Bioanalytical for around 26 years. I'm here with my co-host Dominic Guarino.
Hello, my name is Dominic Guarino and I'm the Senior Scientific Advisor for all things related to ligand binding assays, biomarkers, and flow cytometry. I've been with KCAS for about 7.5 years, and I've been in the bioanalytical space for close to 26 years.
Today's podcast, as always, is brought to you by KCAS, Bioanalytical and Biomarker Services. KCAS is a bioanalytical laboratory located in Kansas City, Kansas, serving the pharmaceutical and biotech industries for over 40 years now. As senior scientific advisors at KCAS, we're available to answer any questions you may have regarding this podcast or any of KCAS's services. We are thrilled to have you listening again. As mentioned, this will be our 32nd week recording the podcast. If you're interested, the other episodes can be found at kcasbio.com. As a reminder, you can follow us on Twitter at @TheWeeklyBio and at KCASBio. We started this podcast because current business environment prevents face-to-face communication. We're broadcasting from completely different places. I am in upstate New York, Dominic is in Kansas City, and Jeremy, our producer, is in Missouri. This weekly podcast gives us the chance to connect with all of you, and we hope it's a chance for you to get to know us too. And even more, it's a chance for you to get to know KCAS and the services we provide. As with our previous podcasts, we'll start with a review of the latest news and resources, and then focus on the topic of our choosing before discussing any feedback we've had from you. We're constantly looking for topics, and we'd be happy to discuss something you want us to cover. Then we'll wrap up and enjoy a few days off before we get together in the new year with some fresh new topics. So again, we're thrilled to have you here and we're looking forward to a fun episode today. Here's today's agenda and podcast topic before we jump into the news and resources section.
Yeah, John. So exciting podcast number 32. As always, we will start with some news and resources and we'll talk about latest in COVID and transition into some non-COVID related newses. And then we'll transition into some non-related COVID news as well. And then we'll tackle the main portion. And today we're going to look back at dealing with COVID in 2020 and some predictions about the future. So it should be a really exciting podcast number 32, John.
Okay. Let's jump right into the news.
Got an exciting set of news to go over today. John, we're going to start with the latest from COVID, as always. And in a historic vote, mRNA vaccines go 2-0 as FDA experts unanimously back Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine. No surprise here, John, right? Right on the heels of Pfizer. Moderna's approved, nothing surprising, but really historic and wonderful news for not only the U.S., but the entire world, John, right? Great stuff. Yep,
exactly as we expected when we talked about this last week. So yeah, the advisory panel met to discuss this. There was 20 yeses, no no's, and one abstention. Basically, their conclusion was that efficacy greatly outweighs any concerns with the vaccine. It should start rolling out this week. So it'd be great. I mean, it's great because it has the different stability characteristics compared to the Pfizer vaccine, so it will actually make logistics, probably this will help rural areas, etc., get access to a vaccine, and we'll see more of that.
Yeah, and I think it's actually, I saw some stats this morning, there's going to be more of the Moderna vaccine available in the U.S. in the coming weeks than the Pfizer. I think it was like 3 million doses already for Pfizer and 2 million more coming. And they think they're going to get that many, first vaccines, right, or first shot of the Pfizer by the end of the year. I think the projections are trying to get 5 million people. And then Moderna has, I believe, a wave of a couple million and then like 6 million behind it. So their production was a little ahead is what I'm driving at. But somewhere in there, John, this is really, and this will be something we'll talk about more on the main topic, but it's wonderful to see. And, just getting more and more news about people in my life that are on the list, and everybody's asking me, should I take it? But it's all yes, and great news, John. And yeah, it's just wonderful.
Yeah, I'm starting to see the same thing where it's like, should I take it? I say yes, and then it's like people who follow on Twitter, their relations are starting to get notified that they're getting a vaccine early in the new year and things like that. A couple of things about this. There is, and it's something we want to touch on in the new year, emerging discussion of how to deal with patients from the placebo arm, where it's like the drug companies actually are talking, should they administer those people the vaccine, whereas the scientific community would like them to stay on placebo so they can measure long-term comparative effects. So, like I said, that's something for us to discuss in the new year. And then the other thing that we had touched on is the low rate of anaphylaxis that has been seen with the Pfizer vaccine. They haven't observed any of that with the Moderna vaccine to date. So that'll be something to watch, obviously, as that rolls out into the population.
What I heard, 6 people total, very low number there, even if it's just for the Pfizer vaccine. And then, the age discrepancy too. I guess the Moderna is 18 and Pfizer is 16. Do I have that right? Yes.
Yeah, because so we talked about this last week where Moderna are actually doing a formal study in teens. Pfizer actually had a small group of 16 and 17-year-olds within their study who took the vaccine. So I think there was some pushback from the advisory panel on the Pfizer vaccine, whether there was really enough statistical power to justify going for 16 and 17-year-olds. But I know that Pfizer were asking that it was applied to that age group too.
Yeah, John, excellent. I'm sure we'll talk more about that in our predictions and the main topic for today. So, John, why don't you tell us the next news article?
So next news article it's something that's been rumbling around for a few weeks, but it's a subject close to both our hearts, where it's actually the return of fans to football grounds in the UK. The UK have had there's a lot more happening there, but they actually early December rolled out a tiered approach for districts as to what it meant for your freedom of movement and things like that. So tier 1 was like least constraints, tier 3 is much more constrained. When they first announced it, there were 2 areas in the UK that were tier 1. That was Cornwall and the Isle of Wight. And then they actually updated the guidelines last week, and Herefordshire actually joined Cornwall and Isle of Wight in tier 1. And so I'll touch on that in a minute. What this means in terms of the tiers, they're allowing fans back into football grounds. For tier 1, it's either you can have 4,000 fans or half your capacity, whichever is the lower number. Tier 2, it's 2,000 fans or half your capacity, whichever is the lower number. And tier 3 is still no people allowed in the grounds. Tier 1 being with Herefordshire. Hereford are now the most senior club in England who could have 4,000 fans if their capacity was that big, but it's actually 5,200. So they're allowed 2,606.5 fans in at the moment. But this is an ever moving target. I mean, London started out as tier 2. But last week it was then announced that it was moving to tier 3, and actually on Saturday moved to tier 4. So they introduced a new tier because they've found a more rapidly infecting variant of the virus in southeast England. So a lot of people are really trying to figure out what's going on in England at the moment. But I will stop talking, but it's been nice to get the fans in the grounds. It's just, like I say, a really quickly moving situation there at the moment.
Yeah, John, I just think the English have made this very complicated to try to figure out what happened, but not what happened or why. It's very interesting and so detailed to say, 2,000 here and 4,000 here. And I think on paper it looks great. And then you try to put it into like practical speak, and it's like, I don't know, created, I think, some confusion for the rest of us that are trying to figure out why, the Spurs have no one. But yet when you go to watch Brighton Albion, they have fans in the stadium. Right?
Yeah.
That's what's happening when you watch the games. And they're not, most of us in the U.S. aren't really honed in on everything you just said there. But what really is happening, John, is it sounds like we're going to see no spectators.
It's going that way. I mean, the UK really has complicated things at every step of the way, and as a result, the way they've dealt with the virus has been really muddled. It's a mess. You talk to people in the hospitality industry, they don't know whether coming or going. I mean, the change in tier 2 to tier 3 with London, that was announced on a Tuesday that was going to happen. They were going to move to tier 3 on Wednesday, but of course restaurants had ordered all their produce for the coming week, assuming that they were in tier 2. So you got food waste to contend with. You got it. Just like I say, it's just an absolute mess. So I ended up with this week or last week actually buying my family restaurant gift vouchers as a Christmas present, so that the restaurant gets a little bit of money from me, and also my family members get the benefit that in the long term. But I think that the other concern about this jumping around from tier 1 to tier 2. One of the landladies I was talking to last week said when they were when things were more open for them, they were absolutely packed out. And because they had a good summer, it's actually just about carrying them through this period because they're stuck in tier 3. But as soon as they go to tier 2, then they'll be packed out again. And it's just going to be this never-ending cycle unless they really come to grips with what's going on. So, yeah, it's not been well handled at all. And one last thing,
Go ahead.
so I saw a tweet from a guy called Tim Walker, who I think writes for a newspaper called the New European. He says, Bournemouth 2, Portsmouth 3. The COVID-19 tiers sound like the football results, only everyone yearns for relegation.
Ah, good one. I like that, John. Oh, like you said, it's been complicated, and I could only imagine what it's like trying to manage this in terms of just logistics from going to tier 2, and then suddenly not only did they skip tier 3, they went to tier 4. You said so. It's just like, oh my goodness, the psychological impact, the economic impacts, just massive for all related, and that's 50% of is in the hospitality industry, right, John? So
it's a big deal, yeah.
League football, that is a big part of your hospitality industry,
Yeah.
right? So it's interesting, and something I'm sure we'll delve. Well, it'll be something we talk about in 2021, John.
And I'll talk more about the tier 4 piece later as well in our main topic. And actually, one last thing on the football. Actually, there's an article which I haven't got any link to. But the Newcastle United manager Steve Bruce was talking. They'd had a series of infections with COVID on players, and they've actually got some players in the squad have been out for weeks because they're still dealing with symptoms. So it's that we talk on and off about how this affects young fit people, but here's players who are tip-top physical condition are still struggling to get on top of the virus. I mean, so, the more we look into this, this is a low-key message, but it really says just don't get this virus if you can actively avoid it, because you don't know if you're going to get symptoms or not. If you do, it can be really, really nasty, and no matter how physically well you are.
Yeah, well, and we're so close to a vaccine that I think it just makes sense to continue to be just judicious about everything you're doing until you're given at least more clearance around immunity. And John, getting back to Newcastle, they actually were down like close to like 15 or 17 players or something. They ended up winning that game. Just to let you know about that. So, and they are dealing with it, and it's a good. I do like the way you're pointing towards. Hey, it's just not affecting everybody over a certain age. Anybody in a certain age group can be affected. That's a lower percentage, albeit, but still something to keep in mind. So don't just think because I'm young, I'm going to be fine. And sometimes I have to remind my son of that, John. That's where I was being. So,
Exactly.
let's talk about, what is it, Immunity Bio, right? As their next wave of vaccines, John. Good story here.
Yeah, so this is just another different approach to vaccine coming through. Immunity Bio, basically it's a subcutaneous first shot followed by 2 oral boosters. They also had a comparative arm where it was 2 subcutaneous and 1 oral booster. So it's really looking at how can we get the vaccine into the body and via different routes. They tested it on non-human primates, showed efficacy, and it's now moving into phase 1. So it's just they looking at monkeys. I mean, it was like a day zero, doses on day 0 and day 14, and then they showed the effect. So just another one to look for in the long term. Again, if it's an oral approach, it might be easier to administer to more remote communities, etc. So we'll see where this one goes.
Yeah, John, you nailed it. The real value of an oral vaccine is the temperature. It
Yeah.
can be stored at, that's a feed type thing. And so those types of vaccines are much longer lasting and certainly have huge upside for global immunity. And John, it just goes to show there's still many companies working on vaccines, no matter how many get approved. There's still, just in terms of forward looking, this is where you want to see more research done. And um, I think one thing I like about this is it's a good sign around the success. Like, I feel like the target here is one that scientists are getting highly successful on, and I think that's due to the sharing, John. Right? So I feel like all this scientific sharing that's going on is helping the immunity bios of the world become more and more successful because they've got more information. So I think it's a great cycle that's happening with this unfortunate pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it is key to have as many different vaccines as possible because we all the world's population lives in so many different conditions, and if you've got the thermally stable ones, then that really helps a lot of the developing countries, etc. So yeah, definitely good to have them. So we move on to the next topic, and this is actually now into non-COVID news, and it's much more in your realm. The next generation of gene therapy for rare diseases forges ahead as developers weather hurdles. And I thought this was just a good one to touch on. It's a very cutting edge in terms of where medicine's going, but there's a lot of money being thrown at gene therapy companies from the investment community. So there's obviously a lot of hope that this will be, our medicines of the future. So there's two already in the market, one from Spark Therapeutics and one from Novartis. But the actual industry is looking to find new and different therapeutic approaches to correct rare disorders caused by errant genes.
John, it's all in the AAV space, right? That's what this is targeting in terms of insertions. Do I have that right with Spark and?
Yes, they are. I think this is the upcoming ones are more looking at how differently can we do it. I mean, key to all these is the delivery system. They're looking. They cited a company called Generation Bio. So rather than using a virus to insert gene correction, they're using alternative technology that avoids touching off an immune response. So it's non-viral, closed-ended DNA that's carried into the body by a lipid nanoparticle. So it touches on the drug delivery that we talk about frequently.
Yeah, it's a lot of things. So you're right. This article is very dense in terms of where gene therapy is going, and some of the more in that orphan disease drugs. More in the orphan disease therapeutic areas, John. So that is where a lot of the gene therapy growth is coming from, because these are people. This is an unmet market, right? Unmet needs. I don't want to put it so business type, but it's an unmet need that is driving a lot of companies. And they mentioned the BioMarins of the world, and then this Generation Core, which is really combining many things, gene therapy. So they got non-viral, as you said, closed-end DNA along with the lipid particles. So they're combining the next generation of gene therapies along with the delivery to target those disorders. And this is fantastic in the face of COVID, John, right? So that's what this main reason why we're talking about this particular article is that even during COVID times, we're seeing uptick in gene therapies and other disorders, again, getting back into where we were pre-COVID in terms of treating that unmet diseases and disorders.
Yeah, so some of the things to touch on is some of these gene therapies, they see the effectiveness die off, but a second dose doesn't necessarily help. So some of where companies are going is looking into what can they do to get around that effect. I mean, it's so Biomarin was looking at different capsules so that the immune response to a first dose is less, so that they can redose later. So they're coming at this from a lot of different angles to really, like you say, meet these diseases that we haven't got any way of dealing with so far.
And that's even you're touching on making it less immunogenic while making it more therapeutic, John.
Mm-hmm.
And that's those are the types of things that the Biomarins of the world are great at. Even they mentioned Passage Bio in here. That's another up and coming gene therapy company. They're doing a lot of first in man trials using some of these latest and greatest techniques to meet unmet disorders and diseases. So good stuff, John. And we'll definitely keep a pulse on that into 2021.
Exactly. So moving on to it, there's actually another gene therapy article, and this one was more about the challenges for gene therapy companies, and the headline was they thought their gene therapy failed. Instead, it spawned a medical mystery, and this was a company a company called GenSight working with an independent investigator, but 37 volunteers with Leber hereditary optic neuropathy received gene therapy in one eye and a sham injection in the other, so basically a placebo and effectively a placebo in the second eye, and that's one way of showing does your therapy work when your control should show the complete opposite. But what they actually found when they went to measure this condition, I think, results in complete loss of vision after time. But what they actually found was not that the gene therapy eye showed an improvement and the control didn't. Both eyes actually improved. So they're now in that position of trying to figure out, well, how did the untreated eye benefit from the gene therapy being administered to the treated eye, and it really revealed how little we still understand the eye. I mean, we've had them for millennia, but there's still figuring out how the eye actually works and how something might move from one eye to the other. It's a great article, just fascinating, and then it talks about the issues that they have faced with the regulators, where the regulators really want that untreated versus treated study design, but this eliminates that because of the migration of the gene from one eye to the other.
John, I think it's almost humorous that they're getting pushback because their therapy worked too good, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's sort of what's happening here, right?
That's pretty much it, yeah. So in terms of talking to the EMA are happy to go with a compromised design. The FDA they're still in discussion with the FDA about how they can get around this. But yeah, it really is. It's basically showing that it worked better than expected. Even the administration to one eye will affect both and really help these people, but that it's halting the move to approval because of like you say, it's working better than it should. So
yeah. Well, and I think it goes like what the other not so surprising. We talked a little bit about this offline, John, right? So there is. I talked about how there are studies in the rheumatoid arthritis space where they'll give an injection into the left hand, and that drug and therapeutic will traverse to the right hand. And it's not surprising the eye works that way. It's just they're the first to show it.
yes,
That's what's so, anytime you become the first in today's sort of high, the amount of information we have, that becomes big news to see that sort of symmetry of the body, right? The body's very bilateral. You learn that. And it's not, to me, it's not totally surprising. But then again, if I had told you the story of the arthritic drugs working that way in the hands, it wouldn't be as surprising. But that's the beauty of science, John. That's what makes it such a big sort of a big news. I think the irony again is that they're getting pushed back because their drug seems to be working too well, which
I think what you have here is
they're going to have to redesign their trial and redo some work because it worked too good. That you shouldn't be penalized like this.
yeah. So I think what they have is the unequivocal proof of it does. This phenomenon has manifested itself. They've definitely said here's what's going on. Now they're trying to explain why it's going on, and that's the next step. While they're trying to push this, obviously move this therapy towards approval. So yes.
It's great.
Talking of approvals, we've always touched on the approvals month to month, and November's a little bit late. But for drug approvals, November 2020, 4 more drugs approved, so that's now 46 approvals of new therapeutics year to date. So, I mean, at this rate, we could well top 50 for the year, which would be an amazing year, particularly considering how shut down we've been due to COVID. This month, 2 small molecule, 2 large molecule. One from Igor Biopharmaceuticals called Zokinvy or Ionafarnib is actually to deal with progeria, which is the progressive genetic disorder where symptoms of aging manifest at a very early age. I remember there was a number of articles on a couple of more high-profile progeria patients back in like the early 2000s in the newspapers in the UK. And then there's we talked on RNA drugs last week, but there was Alnilam had a Oxlumo approved for primary hyperoxaluria type 1, so to lower urinary oxalate levels in pediatric and adult patients. Rhythm Pharmaceuticals had an anti-obesity injection therapy approved. It was actually a peptide, so I threw it in the low molecule, the small molecule bucket. And then YMABS Therapeutics had an antibody drug approved for cancer of immature nerve cells arising from the adrenal gland nerve ganglia or the neck. So yeah, it just shows that we're all talking about COVID, but there's plenty of other things going on in the meantime.
That's a great recap, John. It's a good mix of everything, and I'm sure at some point in 2021 we may just want to continue to drive home what it looked like in 2020 during COVID and what all got approved. But yeah, a lot of those companies have been around quite a while, and good to see them have some successes. Yeah, it's good stuff. Good spattering of diseases that it covered too, not just more high profile immuno-oncology stuff. I heard, obesity drugs and all sorts of good stuff that are hopefully not losing momentum during COVID times.
Exactly. So shall we let's move to the main topic, and this is we're a bit more winging it than usual, but really it's a look back at dealing with COVID in 2020 and predictions about the future. Obviously, we started this back in March, April time because the year really changed on us. We were doing business as usual in March, and then everyone shut down as the planet started to deal with COVID really running rampant. So we've amended our approach to the way we do things. Everything is online. We're in Zoom and Teams calls. We've implemented the podcast, but we still see plenty of business happening. And as we talked about a minute ago, the pharmaceutical industry is back up to speed, and there's a lot of really interesting things going on. But do you want to talk about dealing with COVID in 2020, and we'll take it from there?
So I think John, you kind of covered the 2020 in terms of how we've managed that, and we'll continue to do that into the first part of 2021. But so just looking more back at 2020, there was obviously you talked about more virtual business settings as well as just general communication went virtual. No more face-to-faces, Teams and Zoom and all that. But then we also had the conferences, right? And that that was a plus. I think there were some pluses. I feel like when we had first time calls with, new individuals. You could Teams them, and you could. So it became a way to. In the past, we might have had a technical call, and it just would have been purely Skype audio, or but now there's a lot more videos, so we are starting to seat people, and that was something we got. You heard more comments on, John, right? They were like, "Well, no, we probably wouldn't have met for coffee for a couple more meetings or something, so it was good to meet immediately." So there's some pluses, and then on the negative side, the virtual conferences were a disaster, in my opinion. They didn't work well, and they're trying to get better about it, but that's something we'll talk about in 2021. So there's I hope, a little bit of a snapshot. And then, of course, impact was capacity because we had to adjust, and well as supply chain. So those are some things that COVID 2020, or excuse me, 2020 was impacted as well. So
Yeah, I mean, there was obviously ongoing impact because it was continually introducing engineering controls and more what's the word? Sorry, introduce engineering controls and more approaches to keep employees safe, so that obviously we're still looking at distances within the building, keeping people spaced out. We took on extra space, so again that helps people space out. You got the remote employees who just don't come near the lab because we don't need to be. So it does make things a little bit more difficult because it's not for us. It's not just the personal interaction with our customers. Personal interaction with your co-workers is a key thing as well, and that's definitely what I think one of the drawbacks is. Yes, you can still talk on phone, messaging, and all different approaches, but it still doesn't really compensate for the lack of personal interaction when you're in a similar space.
Yeah, John. So I think one of the things you were driving at was constant process improvement is what's happening now.
Mm-hmm.
An organization, we are always looking at some of the challenges around trying to keep up with the guidelines, and we're doing a fabulous job of that. But if we find something, we have very open forums to identify and correct. And so the organization has always been in a process improvement mode, but it's become really the forefront in terms of safety, right, John? More invested in it, more
Yes.
of the focus. It's just we're investing much more in it due to COVID. So I think that's something that you sort of were driving at. And then, the impact on I call it the water cooler talk, John, where you get to know each other. And, a lot of people frown upon, oh, you guys spend 15 minutes in the break room. But that's really important to be getting to know each other, or we're just robots, right? Like,
I agree.
As robots. We don't want any of that. So there is a lot of that kind of missed. And John, I've been doing some of, we've been bringing on a lot of new people. So I've been having a little bit more like virtual cocktail hours with them, or virtual happy hour, where you might get to know a contracts person in the evening. And it doesn't have to be a cocktail hour. It's just a virtual getting to know you, and on purpose, taking time to just talk about who and what motivates you. So that's always a fun thing you can do. But you're right, John. It does not replace the ability to go in and like have a lunch, or even go to lunch. All that sort of stuff has
Sure.
huge impact on things.
Yes. So his question is, when will it all change, and what do we see coming in the future?
Well, I don't know. I'll give some predictions, right? So now we're talking about next year. I think for the first half of the year, we will function very similar to how it is now. I think there'll even be more restrictions coming as we hear more of hotspots, outbreaks, and even, where I don't want to go down the mutation path just yet, John, because I think it's a lot of hearsay. So let's shelve that.
Yeah, I do. Actually, I do want to touch on that. I mean, we do have the question of what is going on with the UK, and like I agree on the mutation. We really don't know the full facts on that. However, what we are seeing is that a lot of countries are now actually cancelling travel from the UK. So, they've closed the Channel Tunnel. France has closed off. I think most European countries are saying we don't want travellers from the UK. But I saw very quickly in passing this morning that they may have not seen a similar viral pattern in 3 different countries. Australia was one of them. I can't remember what the other 2 were. So it might be that this is something we will watch and then figure out does this have ramifications for us beyond the UK, or what's going on?
So I think part of it is It's premature in that I feel like the mutations are going to happen. Yet, to date, I've felt like the virus still is, um, what's the proper word? Um, Effective against it is what some of what is to be determined. There's the immature piece of things.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, and I'm not scaremongering on this thing in England at all. I mean, the point was made where again I was reading something this morning that the mutation that is being observed, and again we don't know all the details, but it's in a region that won't affect the effectiveness of the vaccines that are rolling out. So it should still be addressed that way. I mean, what I have read is I think it's an increased rate of infectiousness, but it's not an increased severity in terms of the cases that of the infection. So that's what they're saying here. It's just more infectious, but they're not seeing that it's any worse in terms of the effects on people.
Yeah, I totally agree, John. And I think I need to take a pause here because I'm getting some texts from Jeremy, and now you can hear me, and that's because I'm going through the computer for this episode. So that is why you're having such a degree of difficulty hearing. Talking directly into the computer, I'm sure it sounds a lot better.
It does.
That the bigger issue is my mic was never working when we started. So let's do a little bit of a jump right back into John. Cue us up. Where were we?
I was basically saying that was according to the UK, they're seeing a higher rate of infection, but they're not seeing any increased severity in the effects. But it's still obviously a concern about transmission, which is why they've moved to this tier 4. And as I was talking about earlier, because I said I would discuss this, the tier 4 is actually meant like a total lockdown. And so where people had Christmas plans, they've effectively been cancelled because they can't travel. And so it's really at least the government is saying it's all attributed to this new strain that they're concerned about, and that's the effect that it's having in the UK. So it's something that I will obviously watch over the next Christmas period, and then we can touch on it again in the new year, where we'll maybe have more information and see where it goes.
Hey, John, I think that the key to this is most of the vaccines were engineered to deal with this, and
Yep.
let's just leave it there. So I think I'm not worried about mutations at this stage impacting the vaccine. Now, mutations impacting you getting sick, having had it before, is a whole other question. But I do believe the majority of these vaccines, it's not mutating fast enough to be that resistant to the upcoming vaccine, and it's not mutating in a key area that is where the whole technology of these vaccines is to target those spike proteins that should not be mutating from different strains.
And that's absolutely the point that
Yeah.
I like say I read this morning.
Yeah, I
Vaccines
think
should still be effective against this, so I'm not concerned either. It's just we're discussing where we think things will go, and I think that this could have an impact on how countries behave, but we don't know. I mean, it's so early on. The UK is the first one to obviously identify this. They've reacted a certain way. We'll react to it, and we'll see how other countries react too.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, there'll be. So the question is, what will 2021 sort of look like from in terms of just general, COVID slash travel slash business slash, conferences, right? And so I think we both agree the first half of the year is going to be very similar, maybe towards the latter part of the second quarter. I think you'll start seeing what we'll call like hybrid conferences, but I do think it'll still be predominantly people will be in the don't come see me mode. But
Yeah,
I'm going to give it at least a 4 to 6 month window into the new year before we hear of anyone sort of accepting a flight and then a meeting. And I'll stop there, John, because I think the coffee local, I can envision in the April timeframe starting to engage maybe some of my colleagues, because we haven't, I'm at the very close to the facility and I've been twice in 9 months. So I think right around maybe April or May, I could envision potentially going and visiting, or at least starting to be more present and potentially having more, say, coffees and lunches and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think conferences are definitely thinking along the same sort of lines. I mean, WRIB, which is one of our big conferences, is usually in March, April time. They've now shifted back to September in the expectation that that will be an in-person conference. So, I tend to agree that the latter half of the year, hopefully, there'll be much more personal activity where we're really interacting face to face with people more than we are now. Some point I'd like to get over to Kansas, but I'll obviously play that by ear, and I'll when it's advisable to travel, I will travel. Until then, I'll continue to work from home like this.
Well, that's the question. I think there's two sets of ideas happening in the world. There's those of us that will adhere and listen to any sort of government-driven policies, and then there are others who are more, have already somewhat not become lackadaisical. It's more just, somewhat civil disobedience almost, that they just are not sort of adhering to these things, but they're living and they're living fine. And I'm not one to sort of judge. We're not going to go down the path of whether we should be arresting people if they're meeting and so forth, or ticketing people for allowing people into their restaurant. All of that is well beyond the scope of what we're going to discuss. But I do think, John, you got two sets of people as we move into 2021. And, hopefully we can see common ground maybe middle part of the year. That's my prediction.
I certainly hope so. Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah. And then in terms of, well, what else, John? So think about what other sort of prediction?
I think it's going to be. I mean, you've had countries that have made a success of this, and I think hopefully they continue to do so well. But it's question: can we adapt from where we are to do more like they have done? I mean, that would be a good thing going forward. I mean, hopefully there'll be more international cooperation on this. But actually, I do want to touch on this. This is a good story. I mean, New Zealand have actually, obviously contained this well, and then Jacinta Ardern, who's the Prime Minister there, announced that they have sufficient doses to vaccinate their entire population. But also they've bought sufficient doses not just to do New Zealand, but a number of the Pacific Islands like Tonga, and I can't remember I think Cook Islands she might have listed, but so they're actually looking at helping the entire region get vaccinated and be protected against COVID, which I thought was fantastic, and a really nice model where maybe hopefully we'll go in the future.
Yeah, there's a prediction. So I think by I'm going to go with end of Q3 in 2021, the U.S. will have about at least over half the population vaccinated that want it. So I think there's two camps, right? Somewhere, I don't know what that number really looks like, but I feel like, and then upwards of, I think it'll take until, I don't know if we'll see a herd immunity in 2021, but that would be a lofty goal to achieve, and one that is possible, but I don't know if I'm going to predict that per se. If it does happen, it would be easily a year from now or after Thanksgiving before we're at that. And by herd immunity, John, 75% of the population has some immunity, whether having gotten it or had a vaccine or something in that category, recovered from the disease or been vaccinated and proven to be, protective. That's my prediction. There's a bold prediction from me. I'm going to go with November.
Well, I think so long as supply chains continue, we have more approved vaccines such that there are all the options out there. I think that should be doable. I mean, we know we have 2 approved vaccines. We've seen others stumble in development, but hopefully, we do see like the J&J and the AstraZeneca's come through to where we start having a number of different options to really help drive. People getting vaccinated so we can get to herd immunity. I mean, I think your time frame is I probably agree with that. I really hope we get there.
And then I think I'm going to predict at least um, I don't know, 3 more approved COVID vaccines, and I'm going to go at a half dozen therapeutics that are going to get approved, upwards of 5 to 6
Yeah,
therapies for COVID.
yeah, it's interesting that really the therapeutics are what are quiet at the moment. We hear a lot about vaccines, but we're not really hearing much about the therapeutics yet. So I think if we do see those, that'll be again the latter half of the year type of
I don't think
scenario.
they're sharing with the information as they had in the past, John. It's becoming a little bit of
Sure.
I'm going to predict about 6, and then or somewhere in the 5 to 6 range, and I think 3 more vaccines will get approved.
So
And
what's your 3: CureVac, Janssen, and AstraZeneca, or do you think there's others beyond those?
I feel that's a good. The Zeneca one is the one that could potentially fall out, and then I don't know how far. I don't know who that third one could be, but like Mark pops to mind. Although they might be more 2022 trajectory, but I feel like they've got the resources and the
Sure.
ability to move, and maybe even um, some other big players in the space that are escaping me right now. Is it you said Janssen? And does GSK is that who GSK's got a couple in the
Yeah,
uh,
GSK have a couple in the hopper. They had the Sanofi GSK one that stumbled in phase one, so that is one where they are regrouping and figuring out the best approach. So yeah, I mean, there's also there's such
yeah.
a host out there.
I
I would
was
go back to the list and check.
sorry, Innova. You mentioned them. I don't see them making it, but they're long shot at best. I like the 3 you said: the CureVac, the Janssen's, and then the AstraZeneca.
Yep,
Oxford. Yep.
yep.
So good stuff, John. Let's take a little bit of a shift, and we're going to wrap up with some predictions on just drug development in general, John. How about that? Like just in terms of what's the approval going to crack 50 this year? How many approvals? And then if you can try to dissect maybe down to where you think some ADCs, gene therapy, and lipids are. And I can start if you like, or you can go, but you tell me. That's sort of the question.
That,
How many drugs in 2021?
I'd suspect a similar count probably for this year because we haven't seen anything die off in terms of business. The pharmaceutical industry is really still pushing hard to bring new drugs to market. COVID gives extra emphasis to that. So you were saying, you saw 6 therapeutics coming through approved for COVID in that time. Well, there's a fraction of your 50, but I would think we're going to see similar numbers because the pharmaceutical industry is a hot topic right now. There's investment going into it to push drugs to market. I think we're still going to see this level of innovation. I mean, we touch so often on different therapies. I think you are going to see more. Gene therapy is going to come up as a regular part of discussion. We'll still see a lot in the oncology space and immuno-oncology. There's a lot of activity there. People always talk about small molecules going away, but they are regularly being approved every month, so that's not going to change. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see the peptidic drugs, we'll see RNA drugs coming through. It's an industry that's really going. What's the word?
I think it's booming, right? There's the word. It's a booming industry, is what
Yeah,
you're.
and so I think because we're booming despite a pandemic, this will continue. There's a lot of momentum going right now, so I think 2021 should be a good year.
Yeah, and I think it's strange to be saying booming when a lot of people are suffering, but this is not a financial crisis, and that is what typically has hurt drug development and specifically our space, the bioanalytical space, or any of the drug development space. But that's not happening. There's money to be spent. The rate limiting part of it is the clinic, John. I think that's still where. So as I sit here, and I think you're right. If I'm thinking 5 or 6, and we think there'll be 50 approvals, that's 10% of them are going to be therapeutics, but that's achievable because those clinical trials are you see more people volunteering for them, and it'll have a higher rate of accrual of patients. And so the only thing holding back more, I think, approvals is the rate at which the system will allow them to get approved. I think there's easily going to be 50. If the system can do 50 this year, maybe they can do 52 or 3, but that's the rate limiting, not the actual. I think getting them through approval, getting enough capacity to analyze successful trials is what I'm driving at, John. That might be limiting more so than, say, even the science itself or the innovation. I think that's actually ahead of the systems in place to allow for approval. And you factor in all this energy going towards a vaccine, that's eating up, again, I talk in terms of capacity, it's somewhat eating up the approval capacity. So that's a deep thought on my part, maybe, but that's why I think it wouldn't be 60, John. I just don't think the system would allow for it.
Yeah, one other piece, that we've touched on again a number of times is actually preclinical, where we still haven't resolved the monkey shortage, where because of supply of animals was principally from China. Will that be resolved in 2021? But that might have a knock-on effect more into later approvals in 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. That is all part of that, preventing the system from meeting that 60 to 65 to even 70 potential. It's just all those resources are going to slow down some either ADCs or gene therapies or devices. Those are the three areas I see the biggest. Although small molecules still going to make up half the approvals. Let me be clear about that. That's just the way the systems work. There's far too many small molecules. And even in the COVID space, I think that's where you'll see more success is in some small molecules. And then there's some really innovative biologics. But I just think tried and true small molecules being repurposed or reused for COVID is where you'll see more breakthrough. I think more sheer volume. If there's so many more approved small molecules, there's that many more being worked in the therapeutic space. I'm not saying biologics doesn't have several going on. It's just a sheer numbers thing. Thousands more approved small molecules, therefore more energy being put into repurposing them. There's just more opportunity.
Yeah, one final thing. We've had two approved, or do not approved, but two authorized vaccines based on mRNA. It's going to be interesting to see how that changes vaccines going forward from here to where mRNA gets more and more focus.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, that's a good point, John. That it's going to jumpstart the mRNA just industry in general in terms of its perception and general, these historic approvals will help fuel that. So that's a great point, John. I think it's a great advancement. So, John, we're wrapping up the main topic today, and it's been a pleasure. This is podcast number 32 and the final one of 2020. We've got, I think, just one feedback and questions. Do we want to go over our super fans questions? Do we have time? Well, John, so for the sake of time, we're going to shelve our feedback and notes. We're going to do that as episode 33 in the new year. John, but why don't you tell us a little bit about the New Year plans, if you have any, and just general what's going on in your world?
So no New Year plans at all. The house is fully decorated, where my son will arrive tomorrow, ready for. So he'll then be with us for quite a time. Yeah, just all looking forward to it. Got a full stock of food and alcohol, and just really looking forward to relaxing with the family. Obviously, I'll be in touch with my family back in the UK. My wife's family are slightly impacted by the tier 4 piece. My elder sister is completely in the tier 4 region, but luckily her son actually came to visit them on Friday before the lockdown was announced on Saturday. So they're all together ready for Christmas. So obviously we'll have our usual chats over Christmas Day, etc. But yeah, that's our plan. We basically do try and be relaxed as possible on Christmas Day. We actually don't do like a big meal. We actually do a full English breakfast. So it's like a fry up, and it's fried bacon, sausage, egg, all the rest of the works, and that's become a big ritual. And then we'll do a roast dinner on Boxing Day, which is December 26th. So that will be the same as ever. That's it. How about you?
Yeah, no, that's great, John. I think you got. I love the fact that your son's going to come stay with you. I have a similar sort of. I don't know if I don't want to use the word. I don't want to say dull, but it's not a traditional Christmas, unfortunately, because we are somewhat restricted. We will be, we're still on the fence about if we're going to go cross state lines. So that's a to be determined piece. But if we don't, then it'll be very similar to what you had, but we won't make a breakfast. We'll do a prime rib or something of that nature. And then no matter what happens on New Year's Eve, I traditionally have duck. So those are sort of the things that, we kind of traditionally want to have, or, hope to stick to those. Oh, sorry. Did I say, sorry, we have duck on Christmas Eve if we do that. And then Chinese food on New Year's Eve. I don't know what I was thinking there. So, John, our plans are pretty simple. We'll either do some duck and prime rib. So that's the piece. It's a double meal if I'm going to make my own Christmas. And then it'll be Chinese food on New Year's Eve. I do have some leftover fireworks, so I'm hoping I could light some of that off. That might be a little bit of excitement. And then we have a big Teams call scheduled for the 26th as a family. That's Saturday. So that's when, my brother will not be visiting my sister and mom due to some of the restrictions, and they'll just kind of keep everything in their own little bubble as is, and then we'll celebrate the 26th as our target date to do a family couple hours of Teamsing or Zoom or whatever.
Sure, that sounds good.
Yeah, nothing too exciting. And then surprisingly, the delivery trucks have kept coming, so we've got lots of Christmas gifts, so that'll be fun. At some point, we'll open all that up, and I don't know, I'm just happy because my 15-year-old is somewhat excited. No, he's excited for Christmas, which we were fearful of, I think, as you get older, but he's genuinely looking forward to some family time. Got some puzzles, of course. That'll be the other thing. Puzzles will be a big part of my next couple weeks. Anyhow,
yeah, I think the family's more excited this year because it's such a relief after the lousy year we've had. It'll be really nice to get everyone together and knowing that we can relax in each other's company for however many days it is, and that's what we're looking forward to. It's just that taking it easy and just enjoying being together.
Yeah, we've been lining up Netflix to watch and stuff. You're absolutely right. We are excited to shut down. Certainly phones and things of that nature will go bye-bye for large days at a time, which will be fantastic.
So, on that note, yes, have a great Christmas, and we look forward to talking in the new year, because I will try and ignore email, etc., as much as possible. And that brings podcast number 32 to an end. Thank you very much.